Good evening. My name is Miguel Leon, and I will be presenting on the epidemiology of HIV and AIDS in South Africa. First, let's go over some of the demographics and backgrounds of South Africa. South Africa is located at the southern point of Africa in the sub-Saharan region. Its geographic coordinates are 2900 south, 2400 east. It is a slightly less than twice the size of Texas. Its 2014 population consisted of 54 million. It is the fourth most populous sub-Saharan country in Africa. It's considered to be a developing upper middle income country. Its gross domestic product in 2014 was of $349.8 billion. This is in translation to U.S. currency. And some of its natural resources consist of gold, natural gas, and diamonds. So HIV/AIDS in sub-Saharan Africa. In 2012, approximately 25 million people were living with HIV. Nearly 70%. This consisted of nearly 70% of the global total. Southern Africa accounted for 67.4% of the total HIV prevalence, and of that 67.4%, 17.9 was constituted to just South Africa. South Africa does have the largest HIV epidemic of any country in the world, and it is also regarded to as the epicenter of the global HIV epidemic. According to the World Health Organization, the adult HIV prevalence for individuals from 15 to 49 years of age, in the year 2013 was of 4.5 in Africa, and most of this, as previously stated, was accounted for the huge burden placed in South Africa. The first cases of HIV in South Africa occurred in 1982 when two white homosexual men were diagnosed with HIV. Co-infection of tuberculosis has been documented at high levels, with co-management of TB and HIV treatment being estimated in the year 2013 to be at approximately 45%. Between 1990 and today, the number of people with HIV has continued to rise, peaking in 2014 with a total of 7 million. With the oversight of new President Jacob Zuma, the National Strategic Plan, the NSP, between the years of 2007 through 2011, oversaw a dramatic scaling up to South Africa's antiretroviral treatment, the ART program, which is now the biggest in the world. The introduction and high use of ART has led to a great reduction of AIDS-related deaths, with 2014 experiencing the lowest total since 1999, coming in at just a little over 100,000 deaths. The introduction of ART has increased the life expectancy of individuals with HIV and lowered the AIDS-related mortality. But even though these are great news, the HIV prevalence and rate of new infections is still a primary concern in South Africa. So HIV/AIDS surveillance in South Africa is primarily consisted of a second generation, meaning that it monitors trends as well as behaviors. Most surveillance is based on sentinel surveillance sites, where complete reports are monitored and documented in regards to HIV/AIDS cases. The majority of the sites are selected antenatal care facilities, clinics, to monitor the preventative measure of mother-to-child transmission. Also highly common are the use of serial surveys at population levels, and these are basically used to generate selected surveillance data from either demographic and health surveys. Primarily, these surveillances are used to target the subpopulations concentrated in high-risk individuals, and these are oftentimes considered to be part of the behavioral specific surveys, where most of the questions are seeking to find out more or less what the individual's behaviors really are. We do see case reporting across the nation nowadays, but of course this can at times be extremely misguided with the analysis between rural and urban areas. Lastly, we see a major surveillance and monitoring completed nowadays for HIV drug resistance, of which is used to basically to identify and record in the individuals that of which are becoming resistant to art and other treatments. As previously mentioned, surveillance in this region is particularly difficult in South Africa due to great difference between prevalence in rural and urban populations. Urban populations see about 1.5 times HIV prevalence and AIDS prevalence higher than those in rural, and therefore this causes a lot of these statistics to oftentimes be skewed and possibly even incorrect. We do see ANC surveillance most often completed in these urban sites, seeing that the use in rurals is extremely low due to the HIV prevalence. The highest rate of HIV prevalence was in 39% in the urban town of KwaZulu in the Natal province. And it is important to say that the primary surveillance across the nation in South Africa is that of primary surveillance for pregnant women. The HIV/AIDS epidemic in South Africa has placed an extreme burden on the sub-Saharan region of Africa, as it is perceived to be the most HIV/AIDS prevalent country in the world. Statistics for South Africa are as follows. Like I previously mentioned, there is approximately over 7 million people living with HIV. The HIV prevalence amongst adults between the ages of 15 to 49 is about 18.9%. The estimated incidence rate among adults is between the ages of 15 to 49. It's varying at between 1.27. There was an estimated 340,000 new cases of HIV in the year 2014. And along with that came another 140,000 AIDS-related deaths. The AIDS-related mortality rate was approximately 311.46 per 1,000, and this placed a burden on the society of in the year 2009 with $1.9 billion of domestic funds being allocated to HIV and AIDS, and an additional $270,000 of international forces being spent towards the HIV/AIDS epidemic. The demographics of HIV/AIDS in South Africa is quite skewed, seeing that women are far more prevalent than males in regards to HIV and AIDS infection. No recent information for race and ethnicity could be located, so therefore most of our information is going to be strictly gender related and rural slash urban sites related. So, well, we saw that the total female adults living with HIV in the year 2014, that's for females greater than the age of 15, was a total of 3.9 million. 1.3 million greater than the 2.6 million of male adults living with HIV. The HIV prevalence among young men was 4.0, which was basically half of that of women. The HIV prevalence among young women was 8.1. This is for women between the ages of 15 to 24. The age-related deaths among male adults was 64,000, slightly similar to that of women of 63,000, but bear in mind that there are far more males than females, population-based. So, therefore, these numbers are quite shocking. And then lastly, as previously stated, the urban, in comparisons to urban and rural, the urban is 1.5 times more prevalent with HIV and AIDS cases than those in rural sites. So there is quite a wide variety and predominant risk factors currently affecting South Africa, as well as preventative measures being implemented to address these issues. These range the HIV prevalence among high-risk populations are highest between three groups. It's sex workers, which are individuals that are in sex-related industries, um, and this is basically we're seeing at a 59.6% of that. Then men who have sex with men consist of another 10%, and can actually range all the way up to 35%, varying on multiple variables. And then lastly, we see an intravenous needle users, drug users, basically, drug needle related drug users, consisting of about 19.4% of the high risk population. It is important to note that in recent years, with the assistance of international support and the proper necessary measures to take in place, the following preventative initiatives have aided in the reduction of HIV and AIDS in South Africa. We have seen a great use of condom distribution throughout the country. And basically this has placed a great assistance in the diminishing and the lowering, not diminishing per se, but the lowering of HIV and AIDS in South Africa. We have seen a rise in HIV and counseling related for those infected, and to the general public as well. We are seeing that counseling is readily available and accessible to those infected and to those not, and this is basically increasing the knowledge and the awareness of the general population. We have seen decreased mother-to-child transmission by the use, as previously stated, of antenatal care clinics, and this is basically, we're reaching the problem before it becomes a burden on the community. And then lastly, we have also seen a decrease in the reduction of injecting drug use throughout South Africa. There have been many barriers and limitations, like any other country dealing with a large-scale HIV/AIDS epidemic, and South Africa has had to deal with its own barriers and limitations. Being that it was one of the latest countries to join the HIV/AIDS preventative wave in Africa, the country has had to deal with quite a few limitations, consisting of economic financial constraints, being that since the outbreak reached such a high level, it's taken a lot of financial resources in order to address and make the necessary resources available to train this. There have also been a lot of social and cultural constrictions associated with stigmas and discrimination, which oftentimes have delayed the progress and have basically pushed individuals away from seeking treatment and seeking testing, and basically bettering themselves and bettering the community at large. A big issue has been women empowerment in this region, and this has placed an incredibly large burden, seeing that women are extremely undervalued, and they're just not receiving the necessary access, and basically, the basic needs that they need access to, not only when during their pregnancy, but even after birth. It's extremely important for these women, especially in countries such as South Africa, to have these necessary resources and have the needs readily accessible in order to decrease their chances of becoming HIV infected and ultimately just not being another part of the statistic. And then lastly, there are a lot of legal and law restrictions placing in regards to the testing and the accessibility of information, and basically the dissemination of this information in regards to surveillance. So now an outbreak. So now an assessment and slash review of the South Africa HIV/AIDS epidemic outbreak. South Africa has been one of the leaders in the sub-Saharan region of Africa in regards to the control of the HIV/AIDS outbreak. With the new leadership by President Jacob Zuma, who has restructured and centered the focus on prevention as well as antiretroviral therapy treatment, we have seen great progresses. But even though these great improvements have been visible and evident, it's still important that we continue to see South Africa continue to make these improvements, and that the necessary resources and education are accessible to not only those that are infected and containing this HIV and AIDS, but to those that don't, so that they don't become another part of the statistic, and so that they don't continue to place part in the HIV AIDS epidemic and the burden that it is placing on the sub-Sahara African region. With that being said, it's been a great pleasure, and thank you for your time.